Welcome back. Defend Our Democracy has held a conference to mark Anti-Corruption Week. The conference was addressed by retired Judge Richard Goldstone. The webinar focused on whether an international anti-corruption court could curb grand-scale corruption and state capture in South Africa. The discussion was part of the program for Anti-Corruption Week, which runs from 3 to 10 December. The week presents a platform to raise public awareness about how corruption and state capture have taken root in society, its impact on people, and what should be done to uproot it and hold accountable those who have enabled it. For more on this, we're now joined by Zaakirah Vadi, Executive Director at Defend Our Democracy, and she joins us via our video link this evening. Zaakirah, thank you so much for joining us here on SABC News. And you've held currently holding your conference when it comes to Anti-Corruption Week. Just tell us some of the highlights this Anti-Corruption Week has come up with.
So Anti-Corruption Week runs from the 3rd to the 10th of December. It's really something that we've pioneered here in South Africa. Normally, it's just marked with International Anti-Corruption Day on the 9th of December. But we felt, given the scale of corruption in this country, that it needed to be a week-long of activations. And it's now really in its 3rd year running.
And when it comes to dealing with corruption, I mean, we've been hearing this for many years, especially in South Africa, and something that's very synonymous with corruption that always comes to the fore is the State Capture Commission of Inquiry, and of course, looking into corruption. Perhaps just remind some of our viewers when it comes to the impacts of corruption, especially that was investigated during the State Capture Commission of Inquiry. What has been the impact of corruption in this country?
So I think that South Africans, across the country would know what the impact of corruption is, because it's something that has filtered down into our daily lives. We have seen, for example, how corruption and malfeasance at Eskom, for instance, has resulted in load shedding. We've seen how, corruption and malfeasance similarly in Transnet has now impacted on our ports, and in turn that has impacted on our ability now to get goods, for example, during this festive period into the country, and similarly export goods from our country. And so it's in really every sector, that we've seen the impact of state capture and corruption. And in areas, for instance, where people don't have access to water, and there are all sorts of dodgy tenders going about, in rural Limpopo, for instance, we see how that impacts people fundamentally, affecting their very basic human rights to water access. And similarly, I think we see this now filtering down from a national level into provinces and into municipalities. So it's our strong view that we may have had the State Capture Commission, we may have investigated grand-scale corruption and state capture, but state capture never ended with the State Capture Commission. It's something that continues today.
And, South Africans continuously criticize when it comes to the State Capture Commission of Inquiry, and they're saying that when it comes to dealing with those corrupt figures who were mentioned at the State Capture Commission of Inquiry, it's really not tangible here. And of course, today in Parliament, we saw that some of those who were in the SOEs, there will be some sort of delinquent cases against them, and this stems from the findings of the Chief Justice, Raymond Zondo. When it comes to State Capture Commission of Inquiry, would you say that it was, something that it was worth it for this country to go through, if South Africans are saying that when it comes to prosecution, it has been slow?
So the State Capture Commission of Inquiry was absolutely necessary. It uncovered, so much that I think people didn't know about. It really did join the dots for us to understand how the state capture project was systemic and how it pervaded into different SOEs, for instance. But at the same time, I think we are quite critical with the implementation of those Zondo Commission recommendations. It's now been quite some time since those recommendations have been published, and we feel that government hasn't done a sufficient enough job to implement those. And I can give one example here. If you look, for instance, at, one of the recommendations was that the chairs of portfolio committees in Parliament needed to come from the opposition benches to ensure greater oversight and accountability. And that's something that MPs have rejected. It's not something that they've been able to implement. And in the next day or so, I think we're going to hear from government how they've begun to turn the tide against corruption. But in fact, we believe that that may not necessarily be the case, because there are still those who are implicated in that Zondo Commission recommendation that remain in Parliament, that remain in positions of power. In fact, more recently, we've seen someone like Des van Rooyen appointed to a board in Gauteng.
Perhaps as a Defend Our Democracy, if we could get your reaction when it comes to the news coming out of Parliament today. And we understand that 35 former directors implicated in state capture. There will be those delinquency cases being pursued in that regard. What is your reaction as a Defend Our Democracy?
I think we must commend where good work is being done. We've seen, for instance, the Dudu Myeni case really championed by the organization Undoing Tax Abuse. We've seen significant work being done by the SIU, for instance, around COVID-19 corruption and trying to uncover it. And similarly, we believe that there are those within government departments, within the NPA, within the justice system, and within Parliament who still hold the fort, who are still very active in the fight against corruption. But again, it's the scale of corruption versus what we are able to do, what we are able to implement. And we don't think that the level of implementation really meets that growing scale of corruption. And that's really our concern.
And the latest also coming out from the ANC, Mavuso Msimang resigning from the ANC, and highlighting mostly in that resignation letter is the issue of government, and particularly the president not dealing with corruption. I mean, he even questions, basically saying that the president is tolerating corruption. And, he came in on this ticket of a new dawn, but he's saying that, well, we are not seeing this new dawn dealing with corruption. What is your thoughts as a Defend Our Democracy when it comes to the latest resignation we saw from Mavuso Msimang?
So I wouldn't want to comment directly on Mr. Msimang's resignation. I think that is his personal choice. However, as I indicated, we've seen, for instance, in this last period, just with the NPA, state capture related cases going to court. So you have the Coco case that had gone to court, the Nolani case that had gone to court, and the state seems to be quite unprepared, and these cases then get thrown out. And we don't really see the justice that I think the South African public really deserves. I think it's important for people within political positions, whether they are in political parties, whether they're in different positions of power in government, to be able to speak out more effectively against corruption. For some, it may take the form of a letter, or it may take the form of a resignation. For others, it may simply be like a whistleblower, coming out and speaking out against corruption within a particular government department. And that in itself, I think, is quite significant. So it really requires the collective of society to, I think, harness their collective energy against corruption and state capture. But at the same time, it requires a willingness and political will for those in power to turn the tide against corruption. And I think it's safe to say that we aren't seeing significant strides in that regard.
Zaakirah, thank you so much for your time this evening here in SABC News. That is Zaakirah Vadi. She is the Executive Director at Defend Our Democracy.